I think this is our first fully virtual CEO chat. So as you have all gone virtual, we are now going virtual right along with you. So we're going to spend the next hour talking through a couple things. So first of all, we're going to talk about Learning Ally. We're going to give you an update on what we're doing as an organization and some of the great initiatives that we have going on. And then I'm going to bring up my partner in crime, Terrie Noland, who's going to actually walk you through the Learning Ally audiobook solution. And we know as you spend a lot of your time building the solution, you actually don't spend a lot of time actually seeing our solution. So we're going to spend a whole bunch of time actually showing you what our solution does and what it looks like to our end users, our teachers, and our students. So to kick off the morning, we're actually going to start with a video. So kick to video. All right, we're back. So are we back? Maybe we're not back. All right, now we're back. Sorry about that. Whereas you would imagine getting our virtual right as this is the first time we've done this. So if you think about that video, I would think the one thing you want to take away as volunteers, as an organization, is how do we actually stop the tears, right? So if you take Libby and what Libby was going through, those tiers actually should never happen to a student. And if you think about Learning Ally and you think about what we want to deliver, it's how do we get those tiers out of Libby's education? And that's really what we want to be focusing on as we record books or as we develop solutions as we move forward as an organization. There are a couple other big things that were said in that video. So first of all, that there's no correlation between IQ and reading, right? So how do we as an organization make sure that students get the accommodations, get the things they need to be successful right from the start? What you also really didn't see is Learning Ally was actually a big part of that. That video was heavily about Learning Ally. So you would actually see Terrie was up on stage, who you will see in a couple of minutes, giving out all the prizes and awards. And what you'll hear about is the great reading games. It's one of the ways we help to drive reading. It's one of the ways we help to get kids more engaged in their education. So while volunteers are recording books, there's a whole bunch more that happens around developing solution, developing engagement, helping teachers understand how they help their students, and most importantly, how do we help get kids reading more? And that's really what we're about as an organization, is how do we help focus and how do we help teachers get kids reading more frequently and kids that are struggling to read. So back to Libby, right? Our job is to make sure Libby gets what she needs right from the start, and we take those tiers out of Libby right from the start. There we go. So hopefully after you see that, you would all agree that Learning Ally is actually helping to change education, right? So what we need to focus on is getting Libby those accommodations, making sure that she gets the focus, that she gets the tools that she needs right from the start. And it's not just about the audiobook, it's about how do we actually create and help to create the right environment around education and around students like Libby that we're actually changing their outcomes and actually changing their environment around them so they can be successful right from the start. Sorry. So one of the things that was really missing from Libby, if you really think about what was missing in her education environment, is actually how she learns, right? So what we're really focused on now is a term we call student-centric learning. And what student-centric learning is really about, how do we actually understand how a student learns, not what they learn, right? Schools deal well with what kids learn, but they actually don't focus all that well on how students learn. So if you think about Libby from the start, and you think about, right, let's go back to those tiers. What would take those tiers away from Libby? If somebody would have understood that Libby was a struggling reader, that Libby was dyslexic from day one, actually, Libby would have gotten audiobooks right from the start, right? She wouldn't have had to stumble into audiobooks or gotten audiobooks probably 4 or 5 years later after she was already starting to fail. She probably would have gotten a different reading program, right? There are a whole bunch of things that would have changed in Libby's educational makeup and environment from day one, and that doesn't exist today. And what we're now focused on as an organization is how do we actually put the student at the center of education as opposed to content at the center of education. So because of our history and understanding both blind, visually impaired, and learning disabled LD students, it's really all about environment. It's really about how do you understand how somebody learns, what is their potentially cognitive makeup, what's physically different about them, so that you actually would shift the education environment. And we're going to talk a whole bunch about Learning Ally and why we're positioned to do that and the types of things that we're doing both today and in the future to start shifting the organization to really focus on moving the student to the center of education. So we're going to talk a bit about who is Learning Ally and why we're positioned to lead this incredibly important change. So first of all, if you think about our understanding of students, right, we've worked long and hard over the last 10 plus years to really understand how students learn. We've done a whole bunch of research. We spent a whole bunch of time talking to teachers, talking to educators to make sure we understand kind of what students need in the education environment, which is incredibly important. We've done a lot in rebuilding from a library to a solution so that we're not just delivering content, but we're actually delivering it in a way that, as I said before, drives reading and drives frequency of reading. The schools we now reach, we reach over 16,000 schools, which is a huge growth for us over the last 4 or 5 years. And we're doing a lot of work building partners in this area as well. And we'll talk about those very shortly. So we actually believe we're actually positioned very differently than we were 4 or 5 years ago, that we can actually play a pretty big role in shifting the education environment. So first thing we're going to do is actually talk about who is Learning Ally. So Learning Ally, and I'm going to read this direct, is a leading education solution organization dedicated to transforming the lives of struggling learners by delivering proven solutions that help students reach their potential. So a couple of pretty big words for this that you probably haven't seen before. So the first thing is we're a leading education solutions organization, right? So that's what we focus on. We focus on delivering solutions in education. So that's big shift number one. And the second one is transforming the lives of struggling learners, right? So it's not just about reading, it's not just about blind and visually impaired, it's not just about students with learning disabilities, it's actually any student who struggles to learn. And we want to be focused in the future on how do we actually help the struggling learners as we move forward. So let's take a half step back and talk about that for a second. So I get a lot of questions that say, so what does Learning Ally do for English as a second language learners? Or what does Learning Ally do for at-risk population? And the answer is today, we actually don't do that much. But as we think about where we want to be as an organization, it's actually about struggling learners, right? It's not just learners with disabilities. And we actually believe to service students who have learning disabilities, at some point, you're going to have to go broader. You're going to have to address the problems that exist in schools, which is around English as a second language and at-risk students. So for us to believe, or us to impact a large swath of children with disabilities, having solutions that can go broader, having solutions that can actually focus on struggling learners is actually really important to us. So as you think about Learning Ally and you think about the work you're doing, it's really about education solutions and struggling learners, and how do we develop solutions that really start to help those populations. There we go. So we're going to talk about Learning Ally and what we do today and what we're going to do in the future. So if you think about Learning Ally org, which is what I just talked about, right? Today we actually have three different solutions, right? We have Learning Ally audiobook solutions for schools, and Terrie's going to walk us through that. We have Learning Ally audiobook solutions for home, right? So we deliver our solutions, and they are actually different solutions in the school environment and direct the home environment. And right now, the vast majority of our reach is through schools. So we reach roughly 20,000 students through home, and we reach about another 280, 300,000 through schools. So much more students are reached through our schools than through home, but we do deliver two different solutions. And the third solution is our College Success Program for blind and visually impaired students, right? So that is the combination of our Learning Ally audiobook home solution, as well as mentorship curriculum for blind and visually impaired students as well. So we've already started to go broader than just the audiobook solution, and we'll talk about that as we start to dive down into the Learning Ally audiobook solution for schools as well. We do professional development, we do professional learning, we do training for teachers, and engagement games for students. So there's broader than just the library, it's the solution that sits around that. So where are we going? If we think about the future, the first thing we're going to start to look at is the Learning Ally audiobook solution for schools, and really starting to segment that between elementary school, middle school, and high school. So if we think about the impact we have and we think about the problems that exist, whether I'm an elementary school student, a middle school student, or a high school student, they're actually very different. The school environment is very different. The problem set around a student is very different. If I'm learning to read, if I'm reading to learn, or if I'm in a content absorption mode, our design would be very different. So there's a lot of work going on right now starting to segment our current solution into these three different buckets, which means we will probably end up with three different solutions. We're figuring out exactly what that means, but there's a lot of work going on right now to actually start segmenting between elementary school, middle school, and high school. And if you then think about the broader positioning around struggling learners, we can then start to develop future products, future solutions that may or may not have anything to do with an audiobook, right? So back to professional learning, back to professional development, we can go out and develop solutions, teacher training, and things that connect directly to different populations who are all struggling to learn that, like I said, may or may not be connected to the audiobook. So I think it's important that everybody understands where we are today and where we are going in the future, because we will look differently than we do today, 3, 4, 5 years from now. And I think for a lot of the volunteers that have been with us, We look very different today than we did 5 years ago and 10 years ago. And the seed I want to plant is we will continue to look different. And I think that's incredibly important for us as an organization, you as volunteers, to understand that it's all about growth, and it's all about how do we help and serve more students and teachers as we move forward. So we've been actually investing in our future today. So we've spent roughly, or in the process of spending, about $3 million this year to reposition and remove, or to move Learning Ally into the future. And we'll talk about kind of what those big buckets are. Sorry. There we go. So what are we investing in? So we're investing in sales and marketing. So reach is incredibly important to us. So if you think about sales and marketing, people are like, well, you're a not-for-profit. What do you need sales and marketing for? And the answer is twofold. So first of all, revenue. So even as a not-for-profit, you still need revenue to do what we do, and revenue is a big piece of that. But the other one is reach, right? So if you think about where our students are all in schools, and our ability to get to schools through our sales and marketing efforts to reach more kids is incredibly important. So we are now up to 21 people in sales, which is a major shift. So over the last, really since the beginning of the summer, we've added roughly 13 or 14 people within our sales organization. So major shift. We've got 7 people in marketing, and there's a lot of effort being put into new systems. So Marketo, for example, is a system that actually allows us to segment our population, allows us to understand who's coming to Learning Ally, how do we talk differently to different types of teachers or different types of administrators to be way more efficient and effective in our marketing and sales efforts. And we're putting in another tool called Outreach.io, which is basically a sales tool that will pull through our implementation teams that, again, allow us to understand who we're talking to, better manage them, better understand them, and better communicate with them through the organization. So there's a good amount of effort going into our sales and marketing team at this point. Solution development, right? So transitioning to an elementary, middle, and high school solution, as you would all imagine, is not an insignificant amount of effort, and will take money and investment for us, one, to make sure we understand exactly what the solution needs to look like, and then to develop it out the right way from a technological standpoint, all the tools that go around that. So a lot of work going on there. And the third piece, which follows right behind the transition to elementary, middle, and high school, is we just hired somebody, Mona Yost, who's an expert in school program delivery. So focusing on how do we then deliver our solutions. We're hiring a lot more educators. So as we think about what we need to be successful, we need much more depth around educators and teaching within our organization. So we're currently hiring, we will be investing in more educators as we move forward. And we're actually building an educator community. So Terrie, who will be presenting very shortly, used to run our solutions delivery group. Terrie is now responsible for building out our educator community. So our ability to bring in educators, learn from educators, and use educators to help us be successful, we believe is an incredibly important strategy for us. So investing in the sales and marketing, which is about getting more students in, to be totally selfish from an organization standpoint, the revenue that follows behind that, then the solutions that sit behind that, making sure we've got the best solutions within our current audiobook environment, and then how do you actually get more kids reading frequently? And that's what the solutions delivery group is about. More kids reading, and more kids reading a lot, and how do we make sure we've got the right resources to do that? So 3 buckets that we're focused with our current $3 million investment on in moving the organization to the next level. So the other piece that we're looking at is back to our other pieces. How do we really move to a student-centric based organization? So it's a combination of our current investments, right, of moving Learning Ally to having the right capabilities, the right resources within what we do today. And then there's a whole bunch of work we're doing around partnerships. So we're working with UCSF, which is the University of California at San Francisco, Digital Promise, MIT, Boston Children's Hospital, which is connected to Harvard, Curious Learning. There's some great work going on today, really fundamentally understanding how students learn. And based upon their cognitive makeup, there are some games starting to be created that would actually tell us from kindergarten and potentially even earlier forward whether a student has a learning disability and what are the components of those learning disabilities. And then therefore, if I understand the cognitive makeup and what is a learning disability down to various levels, most importantly, what would I do differently, right? So it's one thing just to understand, and there are plenty of tests out there today that are pencil and paper that start to do that, mostly as kids get a little bit older. But more importantly, it's not till they start failing do they actually start to take those tests. So how do we start to get some gamification with some of these great partners that start to understand how students learn at a very early age? And most importantly, what do I do differently? So it's one thing to know that a student has a learning disability or a learning difference. It's one thing to know that they have an attention issue or they have a phonemic processing issue or a memory issue. It's another thing to really understand what do I do differently based upon what I know about a student. And we're working with organizations like these to try to start to figure that out, raise money around these concepts to really put some significant efforts together. So back to Learning Ally and repositioning of where we are now as an organization versus where we were, right? So if you think about us 10 years ago, we were a government-funded based library. Today, we are back to an education solutions company focused on struggling learners and building partnerships with other like-minded organizations that can really focus and bring out game-changing solutions is really what we're about. So we've got the audiobook, which is a fabulous tool. How do we continue to build upon our audiobook is obviously continues to be a big focus. What other services and solutions can we start bringing to the table around a broader population? And back to these partnerships, what are the partnerships? What are the game-changing things we can bring out with partners like these that do fundamentally start to change education? Bringing the student to the center, understanding how a student learns, and then wrapping different types of solutions and accommodations based upon the student knowledge. So that was a lot in a relatively short period of time. But what I'm going to do now is hand this over to Terrie to let her talk about the current Learning Ally solution. And so you guys can see the fruits of all the great work that you are doing. So, Terrie?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's Terrie Noland, and I, like Andrew said, am the Vice President of Educator Initiatives at Learning Ally. So what I'm going to do is take you through a day in the life, not only of our educators, but our students as well, so that you can start to kind of piece all of your work together and how the impact of your voices actually play a key and vital role in what our students and our teachers are experiencing every single day. So before we move to the next slide, I just want to set up the next slide, and then we'll share it with you. So when we go out in schools, and me and others on my team are out in schools all the time, or communicating with schools on a daily basis. And what we like to do is have them, the educators, understand what's going on in the life of a student when it comes to struggling with reading. And so we're going to share a passage with you. I want you just to silently read that to yourself, and then we'll talk about it. So let's go ahead and share the next slide.
Terrie?
Yes. Everyone should have started reading that silently to themselves, and you probably got through a sentence or two, and it was probably a little bit tough for you. This was actually a passage from Harry Potter that was read by Anthony. Anthony was a 9th grader when he read this content. So Anthony was old enough to actually understand Harry Potter. His mom actually wrote down word for word what Anthony read aloud. Now, Anthony is severely dyslexic. And so could you imagine getting through content, reading words like this, 6 hours a day, 5 days a week in school? It would be painful. It would be a struggle. And once you got to the end of a passage, you have no idea what was read, no understanding, no comprehension. You're just trying to get words off of a page. So let's think about the academic impact this has on our students. Next slide. So the academic impact for our students is it's resulting in, if they can't understand the content that they've struggled through, they're not going to perform well on tests. Those state tests that we hear about every spring that educators and students, you know, really struggle with, then they're not going to perform well there either. They're not going to make A's and B's. They're just really going to scrape by in our classrooms, and we've got so many students that are doing that. There is an absolute academic impact for these kiddos. And in fact, the Learning Disabilities Association came out with a research study that said the #1 cause of school dropout is students that have learning disabilities because of that academic impact, but more importantly, there is a social and emotional impact. So let's talk about that for a minute. The social and emotional impact is not only do I have poor scores in my classroom, but I'm very frustrated. I don't believe that I can do well in my academics and in learning, and I have no hope for what goes on after the particular grade that I'm in. I can't see myself in middle school or high school, or if I'm a high school student, I certainly can't see myself in college. And what Learning Ally does is we bring social and emotional strength to these students. Because if I can get access to content that I read with Learning Ally audiobooks, and I can walk into that classroom confident, comfortable, and I can raise my hand and participate in that rich classroom discourse that's happening. And so while we talk about the academic struggles, this underlying social and emotional impact is so significant that we can't avoid it. We've got to think about, when Andrew talked about that student-centric learning, if we're going to think about students, we have to think about the whole student. So Learning Ally brings that social, emotional, and academic strength to our students. Next. Now, one thing that we like to talk about when we share with our educators is that Learning Ally, our human-read audiobooks are such a crucial tool, but it's not the only tool that students need in our classrooms. Students need instruction in reading. They need to be taught how to read. Whether you are from the era of a phonics or a whole language, you remember those readers that you had in school. You remember being taught the alphabet and the language and how to read words and sentences and paragraphs. That's crucial. That's not what Learning Ally does. What we do, over on that right-hand side, we provide you access to grade level content. And what we mean by that is that content that all of the students in a classroom are reading and discussing and learning from. And it's also that content that is in our English curriculums, our science and our math curriculums, our reading curriculums. So Learning Ally is a crucial tool, but it should be brought as a very holistic approach to what we are doing to bring students to reading. Now think about our students that are struggling. Like Anthony, if I'm struggling to read and decode words, then it's hard for me to keep up with that classroom content. And so I could be in 8th grade reading on a 2nd grade level, but boy, that doesn't mean that I still don't need to do the homework assignments and the tests that are happening. So that's where our human-read audiobooks really lock in and provide that tool and that resource. Next, let's think about the power of human-read audiobooks. This is my favorite part, and I always say it is our best asset and our best feature of the audiobook solution, and it's because of your voices. Those voices that bring these books to life. And I want you to really understand the power of what human voice brings. Our human voices bring meaning to text. And what we do, as you can see on the left-hand side there is a picture of what we call our voice text audiobook. You can see the text on the screen of the device, and it is a very multi-sensory approach. What we mean by multi-sensory is I can hear that reader read, but I can see those words on the screen and they're highlighted as we go along. What this does for students is it allows them to focus on content. And so they don't get distracted. They're really focusing in. And we've taken away the need to struggle over decoding words. Once I can focus on content, then I can start to visualize the story. I can start to visualize what happens. Even think about in your own reading, that if you're reading a novel, you really start to create those movies in your mind about the characters and the setting and everything that goes in to what the book is about. So you can visualize those things. Once you visualize, you are 6 times more likely to remember the information. So in the case of Anthony, where he was struggling, never got to full comprehension, never got to the part of being able to visualize this story, he couldn't remember what he read. And now with Learning Ally, you absolutely can. The other part of the power of your voice, the power of the human-read audiobooks, is it increases engagement. I'm sure all of us can remember sitting at the feet of either our parents or a teacher when they would read aloud to us. And research even shows today that we should never stop reading aloud to students, even in middle school and in high school, because what I said about your human voice, it carries meaning. Let's think about this particular segment that might come out of a book. And if I were reading it as a synthetic voice or a computerized voice, what it would sound like. That was a great party. Sounds kind of flat. Doesn't really indicate that it was a very good party or great party to me. But as the reader of content and in the context of what the book is about, what if you read it this way? That was a great party. Wow, you can tell the difference there. It really conveyed how great the party actually was. But what if I read it this way? That was a great party. You can probably hear a little bit of sarcasm coming through. So your voices, when you bring those voices to these words and bring things to life, that engagement for our students is so crucial. I want to share with you the impact of what that means. So there is a very popular book that we hear that is going to be made into a movie, The One and Only Ivan. So The One and Only Ivan is used in a lot of reading and English curriculums that are out there in our elementary schools today. So it's a widely used book. And what we do, as many of you know as volunteers, is really start to match voices with the character and the tone of the book. So those of you that may know the story of Ivan, is actually based on a true story of this silverback gorilla that was brought into captivity and actually lived in a strip mall in California for people to come by and look at Ivan. So this book is told through the story and the eyes of Ivan, the silverback gorilla. Imagine what that voice would be like. It's a strong, masculine voice. And so what we do is we match that to make sure that that comes through when those students are reading books like The One and Only Ivan. So let's hear a portion of this book. All right, so that was the voice of Ivan the gorilla coming, to those readers, and it really catches your attention and engages you in wanting to read that book. Now, as they're pulling up the slides again here, what I want to show you next, though, is that for our students, remember, these are struggling readers, and you can go ahead and go to the next slide. These are our struggling readers. And so those words that we saw in The One and Only Ivan or other novels, that what if I didn't know what a particular word was? Within our reading app, we have integrated tools that help me, that now I don't have to run over and grab that big old dictionary off of the shelf. I can actually look up a word while I'm reading. So what you're seeing here is the ability to select the word while I'm reading and get a definition of that word. This book is Wonder, which I'm sure many of you know of. Once again, a popular movie as well. And the word baritone came up. So for a student that's in elementary school that might be reading Wonder, I don't know what baritone means. I can click on it, I can get a definition, I can highlight it, I can add it to my list of vocabulary words. So we're absolutely transforming the reading experience, and now Learning Ally is a learning tool, not just an audiobook. Let's look at another feature, and that is our note-taking feature. So our note-taking feature that many of you remember in school probably, that when you were reading a particular book, you might had to pull out examples from the book for your book report, or in today's world, students have to cite evidence a lot when they are doing a particular assignment. Let's say the teacher has assigned, I need you to find 5 examples of the use of figurative language within the novel that's been assigned to you. So the students can go in and as they're reading, come across an example of figurative language, click the note-taking tool, this box pops up, and now I'm able to write in some notes that I am citing evidence of figurative language. And then we have a way to email that back to the teacher. Once again, another integrated learning tool. Another feature I want to show you is about the ability to customize our app. So the customization is so important when we're thinking about the different learning needs of our students, like Andrew mentioned, is that everyone wants a little bit of customization, and we're so used to that, right? I mean, think about even when you jump into a car, we move the seat forward or backward, change the mirrors, change the radio stations, all of the above. It's the same thing here for our students. So you can see all of those integrated customization tools of making the letters bigger, especially for our low vision students. We can change the highlighting and the background and the margins within our app. So it becomes a very personalized experience for each of our readers. Let's think about next the change that is happening because of your voices. That book that I shared with you, Ivan, that is a single voice, a single recording, and it is one of our more popular books across the country. Like I said, it's going to be made into a movie. It's in a lot of our curriculums. So the books that you're reading, look at the impact that happens across the country. This is a heat map of all of our schools that are represented throughout the country. And this was done about a year ago, so we've got a lot more schools that are popping up. So that massive, meaningful change that one voice, one reader can have, and it just multiplies across the country. Let's think about the success that we see with we've talked a lot about the app and the solution, but let's think about the success that we see for our students and our teachers. This is Nelda Reyes, and Nelda is a very, very dear friend of mine. She's an educator community member and leader that does a lot with Learning Ally. She's done webinars for us. Next week, she is actually taking over our Instagram feed and doing a lot of work to support Learning Ally with our great reading games. So our great reading games are one of our reading programs that the video was about, just one of our reading programs that we bring to our schools to help them learn how to use Learning Ally in a very effective, integrated way in their classrooms. So this is Nelda and her students when they participated in one of our reading challenges. What I want you to know most about Nelda is Nelda will tell you that Learning Ally absolutely transformed the way she teaches. She believes in Learning Ally so wholeheartedly that she transformed her own educational practices within her own classroom, but she's also brought it into the rest of the school, her entire district, and like I mentioned before, she is a leader in what we do to serve other educators around the country. So Nelda, one of those teachers that we want to celebrate and to lift up when it comes to sharing best practices. And one of the ways that we want to support our educators, what you're seeing now is another piece of this solution. We're not just the app, we're not just the audiobook, but we have online, educators can log in and actually see their reading progress of their students. We're all about creating habits of reading because consistent reading over time boosts students' vocabulary, it boosts their ability to stay on grade level with the rest of their students, and we also start to see some really good academic, social, and emotional outcomes that happen with our students. So this dashboard that you're seeing here, all educators that are a part of Learning Ally, which is right now, we've got about 60,000 educators that are enrolled in Learning Ally. They can see their students, they can see their reading data, they can see their reading progress, and what we call reading with frequency. That means building a habit. That means building a habit with using Learning Ally consistently over time. So this right here is also reflective of how many students are hearing your voices that are such an impactful thing for them. Let's see a quote from Chris Cerf. He's actually a former superintendent of Newark Public Schools. And this is just one of the many quotes that we have from teachers all over the country. Through Learning Ally, all of our children have the opportunity to access critical reading material to enhance their personal and academic achievement. The best part is seeing their reading levels improve, sometimes dramatically, and then the self-confidence that follows is truly amazing to see. As you can see in this quote, where we started was those academic, social, and emotional impact that Learning Ally has. We give students strength in all of those areas. And I like to say we put fluff in their wings, and every single one of us need fluff in our wings every single day. And I just want you to know as volunteers how important you are as a part of that process. Your words, your voices are putting fluff in the wings of our students and our educators, and we truly appreciate it. So Andrew, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Terrie. That thank you's not for Terrie, by the way. That was, but thanks, Terrie. So yeah, so a couple of things. So first of all, I think I'm going to go listen to that book. So just hearing a couple of paragraphs, but it tells you exactly what Terrie said, right? The engagement and the quality of the voice and engaging students in reading and engaging them in stories is incredibly important, right? So creating that level of excitement, putting that air in their wings to help and let kids know that they can actually fly. And back to that first video we saw, it's how do we make sure that those kids don't go through what that student went through, right? How do we make sure that, you know, if you think about the Johnson & Johnson No More Tears, right? How do we take the tears out of education for so many students? And that's a big thing that we need to continue to focus on as an organization. So hopefully you got a better understanding of, one, Learning Ally as an organization, who we are today, what we're investing in for today as well as for the future. And hopefully Terrie gave you a better understanding of not just what our audiobook does, but the broader solution and how do we wrap it all together and how do we actually engage more students and help teachers be more successful with what we do today. So that said, we've got roughly 10 minutes or so for questions. So I'm going to turn it over to the virtual crowd and take some questions.
Hi, this question is from Anna. Why are so many new technical study material books Learning Ally produces made only for sighted dyslexics when the study subject, programming law, public health, has no prerequisite of sightedness, meaning that the course materials are inaccessible for VI readers?
I have no idea what the, can you read that again, please?
It's a very detailed question. I'll try again. I'll go a little slower. Why are so many new technical study material books Learning Ally produces made only for sighted dyslexics? So that's the first part.
So can you ask a follow-up there? Because I don't know why. So any book or anything we produce are both for blind, visually impaired, as well as dyslexic students. So there's nothing we produce that is only for one population. So I'm not sure where that question comes from.
We can follow up.
Yeah, so if Anna, you can plug something back in, that would be helpful. And there was a second part of that question, I think.
It was about inaccessibility for visually impaired, but I think you kind of touched on it, Andrew.
Yeah, so I don't know where anybody would think that what we produce is only for one population. What we produce is for anybody with a disability that qualifies for Learning Ally services. So if you want to clarify question, happy to take it. So
okay. We have a question from Kathy. What happens when the recorded book is finished?
So if I don't get too technical here, so once the recorded book is finished, it runs through a QA process. So the first piece is a QA process. It is then compiled, and depending upon whether it's mapped to text, it has to then get pulled together with the text. So it's the book that you saw, it's compiled on top of the text, and there's a machine called Herman that does that maps the voice to the text. And then through the magic of technology, it all comes together. I wish I can give you a more detailed, because I can't, but I'm sure we can get Dave up or somebody to walk through the more technical pieces. So it then gets added into the library and made available. Once the voice is recorded, it's QA'd, and the text is put together. Basically, from that point forward, you've got a book. And if you want more technical detail, we can get it for you, but I cannot give it to you. So.
We also have a question from Jennifer. Can you elaborate on the tools that Learning Ally has in the works for early identification of dyslexia?
Yeah, so I can't go too far because a lot of them are pretty early. But there is a tool that's actually in development right now by UCSF and Curious Learning, who you saw were two of the partners, that actually starts to look at, and if we just talk about, and we'll leave it at literacy at this point, that identifies literacy disabilities by going through a game. So the game is actually being normed right now for basically kindergarten and first grade, which would allow you basically to break down whether somebody's got a phonemic processing disorder, whether somebody has some memory issues as well in the mix. And so there are a whole bunch of things. I think there are 11 things that it's getting normed against at this point in time. So that is hopefully going to be ready next summer, but there's a whole bunch of work happening. There's another tool that comes out of UCSF called ACE that does executive function, attention deficit. We're working on figuring whether that has some ways for us to pull forward. And Harvard/Children's Hospital is working on another literacy tool as well, which is a little earlier in the mix. So there are a couple of different pieces in the mix right now. Where, as I said, ACE is technically able to be used at this point. We're figuring out if we can pull that into some things. The other two literacy tools are probably about a year or so away from being able to be brought to market.
There's another pretty straightforward one for you, Andrew, from Leisha. Is there a future avenue for volunteer readers to receive compensation?
Well, then you're no longer volunteers. So we look at different models. At this point, that is not something we've actually looked at, is compensating our current readers. But As we always deal with change in this organization, you never know what can come, but that's not something we've actually talked about.
Beverly wants to know, how do we get information to record books? What are the requirements to be a reader in our home or other locations? We can probably direct her.
Yeah, we'll direct that information to you directly, so we'll handle that as a follow-up.
There's another question from Leisha. How do you make sure that you have enough voices to record your requested books?
That's a great question. So a couple things. So one, we have a demand of books, right? So it all starts with how many books do we actually have to produce. And then the second piece becomes, do we actually have enough volunteers to produce those books? So there is a whole group of people that run that whole model to make sure that we've got, one, the right books are being produced. That is all gauged really off of what curriculum is being used in school. So that's the first churn that we take through is, do we actually have the right curriculum? The second piece then matches the volunteers through into the curriculum to make sure we've got the right volunteers and enough of the volunteers. And that's something we absolutely will be looking at. So as all of you are aware, we went from studio-based model to a virtual model over the last really year or so. I think the next step for us is, now that that model is up and running and effective, is how do we actually potentially grow that model out? So I think that's part of what we'll be looking at next, is how do we start producing more content based upon curriculum and bringing more volunteers into the fold. For those of you who don't know, we just hired a new person who's going to be running the volunteer community. So Paula, last name? Thank you. Has been on board for about 3 weeks now. So, and she'll be following up, I'm sure, on a whole bunch of these questions, as well as the engagement around volunteers and just the types of things you're asking today. What do we need to do to actually start to grow out our volunteer community, which Paula is going to be responsible for? So, wow, that's pretty good timing. I don't think I've ever hit timing at that close before. Any more questions?
No, they're following.
Okay, so we have a bunch of follow-ups. So first of all, thank you very much for giving us your late morning, actually, depending upon where you are, early morning, late morning, or early afternoon, depending on where you are. As Terrie said, thank you. Thank you for the great work you do. Hopefully you now have a bit better understanding of to really appreciate that your voices matter, and your voices matter to all of our students, whether they're blind, visually impaired, have a learning disability. It's all about creating an excitement of reading, right? So the quality of the voice, the storytelling is incredibly important to our students. So thank you for all the great work you're doing. And I think we are planning on getting these back up quarterly, so I will see you guys again shortly. Thank you very much.